President in this room is signing the law, the Affordable Health Care Act. Hard to believe, 13 years ago. It seems like 13 days ago. I think it was I think most people agree, the most consequential piece of healthcare legislation since the creation of Medicare and Medicaid in 1960. I talked to the president yesterday, got a chance to speak with him. We did a little thing together. And it's an extraordinary achievement by the Affordable Care Act has been called a lot of things. Obamacare is the most fitting description. Obamacare. Many of you that day after fighting for decades to make it happen. And I remember 3 words I used at the time. I thought it was a big deal. And I stand by the fact it was a big deal. I also called it at that time a historic day, because history is not merely what's painted and printed on walls and in textbooks. You know, it doesn't begin or end with the stroke of a pen. History is made when women decide that there's a greater risk in accepting a situation they cannot bear than steeling our spine and embracing the promise of change. You know, and no one has more in her spine than the greatest speaker in the history of this country, Nancy Pelosi. Nance, it's no exaggeration to say this would not be law without you. It would not be law without you. If it weren't for the Speaker's relentless push to get this law passed and then defended at every single turn, we wouldn't be here today. And Kamala, I want to thank you for everything you've done to defend this law as Vice President, as United States Senator, and as Attorney General, along with my son, Beau Biden. You both brought cases to defend it. And I also want to thank Kamala for her leadership and fight to protect reproductive rights for women. She's leading us. Look, so many of you here worked so hard to make history that 13 years ago today. And I just want to start by saying thank you. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart, thank you. There's millions and millions of people who owe you because you stuck with it and you keep defending it. 13 years later, it's easy to forget what life was like for hardworking families before the Affordable Care Act. You know, but all of you remember. Remember when a parent with a heart disease or diabetes or a child with asthma couldn't get coverage because of a pre-existing condition? Remember when women had to pay more for insurance because they had a pre-existing condition? They were a woman? Not a joke. Say it today to people, they look at you like you're kidding me. But that was the case. Remember when you couldn't leave a dead-end job because you couldn't risk losing your health insurance? Remember when a 22-year-old kid could get kicked off his parents' plan because he graduated from college? Remember the donut hole when seniors on Medicare reached a point every year when they had to pay the full cost of the drugs out of pocket? Remember when millions of low and middle income families, particularly those families, were locked out of health insurance because there was no way they could afford it. None. I said earlier, my friends heard me say this before, I can remember we lived in a 3-bedroom split-level home, and my bedroom was up against the wall where my parents' bedroom was, and my dad's headboard was there. And I remember I was like 14 years old. I remember my dad, I could see, he could hear he was just restless. And I asked my mom the next morning, went to work, what's the matter? She said, well, his company just told him they're not going to pay for health insurance anymore. How many people lie in bed, awake, wondering? Remember when insurance companies could cut you off halfway through chemo? Because you reached the limit, what they were willing to pay? I remember, I talked to you about this, Chris, when my son Beau was dying of chemo, dying in the hospital because he had stage 4 glioblastoma. And I got a call from someone asking me for help because they thought they were going to have their insurance cut off because they ran out of time. And I thought to myself, what in God's name would I do? Had they come along and said, sorry, you've run out of your coverage. Folks, at the most vulnerable point in a person's life, the moment when you really need it, you could hear the word sorry, your insurance has run out. Folks, our MAGA Republican friends, and by the way, I want to be clear, there's some good, decent Republicans out there. I'm not suggesting this is all about bad Republicans. But this new crowd it's not your, this ain't your father's Republican Party. They may have forgotten all I just said, but I haven't. You haven't. All Americans deserve a peace of mind that if an illness strikes or an accident occurs, you can get the care you need. But the truth is, too many folks lie in bed at night and said, look, staring at the ceiling, wondering, my God, what happens if she gets breast cancer, or I end up with a serious cancer, or what happens to the kids? What then? What then? Do we have enough insurance? Can we afford the bills? What's going to happen? If it gets bad enough, maybe we have to sell the house. We don't have any more equity. You know, I think it's a matter of what you value. And I think all of us in this room value peace of mind for everybody. Everybody deserves a little peace of mind for things they can't control. That's why my administration is focused intensely on building on the progress of the Affordable Care Act, getting more people affordable insurance, lowering prescription drug prices, giving families more breathing room. We have passed historic laws to get that done, and now we're moving quickly to implement them so people can feel the effects in their everyday lives. The Affordable Health Care Act expanded Medicaid to cover an additional 20 million people. Before it was passed, 20 million people fewer people had insurance. So it expanded to cover 20 million more people in Medicaid. That means more cancers detected early, more mental health treatment available, less medical debt, fewer evictions. You know, I signed the American Rescue Plan, which went further and allowed states to extend Medicaid coverage to new moms for up to 1 year after they gave birth instead of only for 60 days. You remember, Gov, what that did, what you guys did? 36 states and counting, and now we're extending it to a full year coverage.
We've been watching President Biden discuss the 13th anniversary of the Affordable Care Act. He joked and said it was more like Obamacare was a, quote, big deal back then, and it remains one of the most consequential pieces of legislation to date.
We also watched as the president thanked former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for its passage and Vice President Harris for her defense of it. We'll continue to listen in on this and bring you any news items that emerge. But coming up, a new report on the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States is coming up. This is CBS News.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And there becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're gonna tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen.